Today, we welcome to the program Dr. Jorge Valdez, a founding member of the group that went on to become the Medellin drug cartel, known, of course, with Pablo Escobar. Let's get into the conversation. So you immigrated to the United States from Cuba, which may not be the obvious path for someone that ultimately gets involved with the Colombian drug cartel. So tell us a little bit about that and immigrating, and then your kind of initial contact getting involved in this.
So in 1966, so I was raised among a very, very wealthy family in Cuba. My father did not want to come to the US. My mom did. My mom, very, very religious, didn't want kids growing up in a communist country. So she wanted us to come. And so we applied. And in 1966, when I was 10, we ended up getting our visa to come to the US. So, but at that moment, my mother stays behind. So my father, who's 40 years old, does not speak English. My mother did. My father did not speak English, comes to the United States with three little kids, 10, 9, and 5. And at that moment, it was something that's really important because it was the moment that I actually became a diehard atheist. I was like, hey, you mean we're leaving Cuba because we're going to go to the United States to be with God? And now 11 of us are sleeping in a one-bedroom apartment, writing down what time we're going to take a piss because there's only one bathroom and we have no food. All that we have is black beans and rice on Monday, red beans on Tuesday, white beans on Wednesday. So anyway, with all that, but still, my father was a man of high principles. So I studied hard and I was really focused, David. I mean, I was laser focused. I never did drugs till I was 21 years old. A lot of time when I speak, I talk about like, man, I didn't even have sex till I joined the drug cartel. Now, that's probably not a good reason to join a drug cartel. But anyway, I was the youngest employee in the Federal Reserve Bank at the age of 17. Straight A student, University of Miami. And when I'm about to graduate, my accounting professor comes to me and says, look, I come from Michigan. I don't speak Spanish. If you do my Spanish clients, I'll give you secretary, office, all the things a kid dreams of having, right? Now, I'm going to University of Miami. I mean, I'm working at the Federal Reserve Bank full-time in the morning, from 7 to 3:30, and I'm going to University of Miami full-time at night. And that's my whole life. I had no social life. I mean, I looked like a nerd. Really, I had braces and anyway, didn't go to parties, didn't do drugs, didn't drink any alcohol. And just the first client that I ended up having was a little grocery store. And, I go in there on Mondays and every Monday, and the first Monday I go in there and I see 200 some odd $1,000. And I mean, I never seen anything like that in my life, you know. And I'm looking at the little, typical shopping center, strip joint type of stores. And I'm like, where the hell are these people getting all this money? Then I come back the next Monday, and there's like 100,000. Anyway, over 3 weeks, there was $300,000 I deposited. Now we need to go back. We're going back to 1976 when there was no stigma about cocaine. It was something for the rich and famous. All the Hollywood celebrities did it. Anyway, long story. When I finally asked them, I said, look, man, let's talk about a little accounting formula. You buy something for $1, you sell it for $2, you have $1 profit. We've had $300 worth of deposit, but we've only bought $1,200 worth of groceries. What gives? Anyway, they just looked at me and said, hey, we're just drug dealers. I mean, just nonchalant. Now imagine this kid, 17-year-old kid, who had never done nothing wrong in his life. I mean, 20-year-old this time, never done anything wrong in his life. All of a sudden to find out I'm, working for drug dealers. Well, first thing I said to him was, hey, you're an accountant. You know how we justify things. You're an accountant. You were trained to count money. As long as you don't break the law. There was no money laundering laws at that time. So I ended up working for them. They asked me, one thing led to another. They asked me to open a shipping company, a banana company. And I thought I had it made. But all of a sudden they come up to me and they're like, hey, you work for the government, right? I said, yeah. He said, okay. You know how to open foreign bank accounts? I'm like, yeah, I know. I knew from the Federal Reserve Bank, being part of an audit team, that it cost you about 750 grand Cayman in the 70s, right? So they're like, how much? I said, $10,000. Now I'm like, look, I'm going to do my accounting. They pay me $1,000 a month, which to me was like heaven. I'm making $350 an hour at the Federal Reserve Bank. And I'm like, $10,000. And they're like, all right, open three. And I did. And one thing led to another. And then they introduced me to the guy that you will see in my documentary, Manuel Garcia, who's never ever spoken. See, here's the funny thing: when you look at all narcos, look at all the stories, they're all made up, right? Because who's there to talk about how it really began? There was no Medellin drug cartel. The group that I was part of that began was what eventually became the Medellin drug cartel.
Okay, so let me ask a couple of questions because there's a lot there. I want to make sure we don't skip over important things here. So the mechanisms you started with were you created this banana company which was meant to actually be the infrastructure for transporting cocaine. Is that was the point of that corporation?
Well, at that time, that was their intention. I was so naive that my intention was it was a great business.
I gotcha.
You know? But that was their intention. The thing about it, that all the facade literally just went away within 6 months. Within 6 months, one thing led to another that I detail in my book, Coming Clean. And they came up to me, my godfather, Manuel Garces, who started this organization. Pablo worked for him. Think about it now. Pablo started in 82. We started in 76.
And just so the audience knows, you're referring to Pablo Escobar because we haven't named him fully yet. You're referring to Pablo Escobar. Right. This operation you started predates the bulk of the Escobar era.
Oh, totally. Escobar was a runner for my godfather in the early 80s.
Right.
And eventually he would literally how Pablo started was going to like Peru and places like that and getting base because Colombia did not produce cocaine and getting base, and then Colombia would crystallize it, and that's how he got started. He ended up getting a little bit of power, but I mentioned him only in the essence that everybody thinks that the Medellin drug cartel was Pablo Escobar. You know, truth be told, he was not. There was a lot of people. There was 2-3 guys much more powerful than him, much wealthier than him. The thing about it, he was the guy with the big mouth, right? He's the guy that wanted to take all the credit, and those guys said, "Hey, let him take the credit. You know, as long as we make the money, let him take all the credit he wants to take."
Were there any loyalty test type things that you were subjected to as you were given more responsibility?
You know, it was, David, it was really something, it was so surreal back then. You know, it's like within 6 months, when my godfather starts to tell me, "Hey, you're going to start handling all our operations in the U.S." And I'm like, "What the hell does that mean?" He says, "You're just going to start handling, receiving the cocaine, distributing, collecting the money, bringing it back." I didn't even know what the hell cocaine looked like. To me, it could have been sand. It could have been sugar. And, but you know, the things in life, you just figure it out. I'm like, "Look, you really don't want me to do that because now I'm opening foreign bank accounts all over the world for them. I'm meeting with ministers of finance in Liechtenstein, Grand Cayman, Tortola, you know, Switzerland. And I'm like, you really don't want to mix this up." He said, "Don't worry, it'll be fine." It was such a different world back then, right? Again, because there was no violence, there was no ICE. If you look at the clips I sent you in my video, the first undercover DEA agent in my case, you know, who ended up becoming a good friend of mine, he tells you, he said, "Look, the first targets were you and Manuel. When we found out the amount of cocaine you were bringing in, it blew our mind." Only because my attorney was ratting on me. I had no clue about it.
So let me ask you about that. You say you were involved in trafficking 95% of the cocaine that ended up in the U.S. market in the 80s. What does that look like day to day? Like, how much is that?
Okay, so in the 70s, because I went to prison in 1980. So in the 70s, we were bringing in, let's say, 600 kilos a month.
A month, okay.
A month, minimum. The least month was 600 kilos. And we're selling it at 70,000 in California. That's $42 million a month. Now, this is 1977 money.
Right.
So, and from there on, we have months where we brought in 1,200 kilos, you know, and so we were doing anywhere between 40 to $70 million every month. They said that the Federal Reserve Bank had more cash in Miami than all the Federal Reserve banks combined.
Sorry, that the cartel had the money, right? I think you misspoke there.
No.
Or the federal. Oh, you're saying the Federal Reserve Bank in Miami, because of the money being handled for cocaine, exceeded all of the other Federal Reserve deposits
combined. That
wow.
was according to the federal government.
Yeah.
It was probably the only era where trickle-down economics really worked, right?
Right.
We built Miami because the thing with us, as opposed to trickle-down economic with anybody else, we spread all the money. It all went back into the community. We were buying houses, building buildings, buying cars, you know, Miami went from a town where all people would go to retire and die to a booming city out of the ashes.
Can you talk a little bit about, there's a portrayal, whether you read the book Killing Pablo or you look at, the recent miniseries with Sofia Vergara about Griselda Blanco, or whatever portrayal, the Blow, etc. One of the characteristics that comes through is that eventually life gets very cheap. On a whim, because of a look someone doesn't like, people get killed, and that's it. Can you talk about whether that's an accurate representation of what went on or whether that's a fictionalization?
That is an accurate description of what eventually went on. Come the 80s, come Pablo. See, that was the whole downfall. When Pablo started killing ministers of finance, it really did. It became down to, just think about it. At one time, we were the most powerful criminal organization on earth, bar none. Pablo is the only man to ever bring a government to his knees, to surrender a government. But yet now, today, there's two of us alive. Everybody else dead. There's nobody around. And the thing about it is, what they fictionalize in those stories, and that's one of the reasons why I've always fought. When my book came out in '98, I got offers left and right. When Cocaine Cowboys in Netflix came out, I got offers left and right. And I've always turned them down because, look, I'll be honest. I watch Narcos, and I enjoy watching it. I hated Sofia Vergara's Griselda. I'm going to tell you, that's the biggest voice ever in history. The biggest lie, the biggest con. At least the other ones have elements of truth. Because I always sit back and I said, like, well, how would you know that that's true? Were you there? Or did you read this in some newspaper article? But Griselda, she was a nobody. Anyway, that's another story. But the thing about it is that at the end of the day is, like I've always said, look, media entertains or educates. I have no interest in entertaining anybody. People write to me, man, if you tell more cartel stories, you'll have 1 million followers. David, I don't give a damn. I couldn't care. I don't care about followers. I built a multi-million-dollar company. I retired. I have no debt. I live a heck of a life. So my mission in life is to tell people, listen, you can screw your life up. But you know what? It doesn't have to end the way it began. There's faith. There's a God who forgives. There's redemption. You can become better. You can become productive. And that's the message that we're going to get out in Shadow of the Wolf. Because I'm just not, even Cocaine Cowboys, Netflix will tell you, I told them no 3 years in a row. I will not be part of that because of what you just said. They sensationalized our life. And sure, it was exciting. Look, I was 21 years old making $1 to $3 million a month in 1977. You want to talk about fun? Of course it was fun. But I'm always sensitive to the fact that there's a mother there watching that's going to say, I buried a child because of you guys. Or a child saying, hey, I never met my father because of what you began. We began, we used to tell ourselves, hey, we're the Kennedys of the 20th century. We're not harming anybody. There's no violence with us. All of our clients at the beginning were in Hollywood. We're all the movie stars, all the rich and famous people that you can imagine. Everybody. I remember movie stars buying 2 kilos a month, 140,000 just for parties.
Wow.
It's crazy. So
can you tell us about the issue you had with Pablo Escobar that led to him ordering your murder?
So, and I'll predate to this because it's something that's really important. Pablo, so I ended up in 1985, 86, I ended up bringing, 20, 30, 40 loads with Pablo. I knew one thing. I knew that there was people that were losing their loads, and there was one common thread. Pablo was not involved in that load. In other words, he did not have any cocaine in it. And my assumption was, he's probably telling on them or getting them killed. So I went and I told my godfather, look, if we're bringing in 600 kilos, let's divide it. Give 200 to Pablo and let Gacha, the other guy who's much more powerful than Pablo, 200, and we're bringing 200. So we were charging him $7,000. It was costing me about $4,000 a kilo. So I'm still making money on his. So he comes up to me and says, I want to offer insurance. I'm like, insurance? What are you talking about? And he's like, I'm going to tell people that I'm going to charge him $10,000. If the load gets lost, I will return the cocaine to him in Colombia. I'm like, Pablo, we've never lost a load. Why would you want to do that? He says, every 3 loads, I'm going to tell him I lost one. And I'm going to give him the cocaine back in Colombia at, $5,000, $6,000, sometimes whatever it was at that time. And yet I'm going to have 200-300 kilos that somebody else paid for in the US. So great business deal for him. But I looked at him, and this is what I tell people. I try to always live my life never walking the line. Because if you walk the line, sooner or later, you're going to step off. You're going to step out of bounds. So therefore, I said to him, look, Pablo, I'm not interested in it. You can offer all the insurance you want. Nobody knows me. They're all your clients. But it's a lie. And I don't participate in a lie. A year and a half goes by. And he did, God knows how many. A year and a half goes by. And, predate that. So one of my really great contacts in Colombia that was part of the original group gets drunk one party and tells everybody, Pablo's got a lot more fame, but I got a lot more money. And he did. Pablo had him killed. I mean, they did not end up killing him coming out of a fruit stand, but Pablo went into the hospital and killed himself. One thing that Pablo did, if he killed you, he killed every male in your family. So he ended up killing his brothers, and there was one son who was 11 years old. The guy that was the person I dealt with in the U.S., Frank's contact in the U.S., came to me to Miami with this kid and said, hey, the only place he's going to be safe is in your house. So I called Pablo, and I told him. And he just hung up the phone, but everything was fine. 2 years go by. The kid's mother, and I'll show you why this is relevant, the kid's mother goes and calls me a year and a half later and says, hey, I want my son back. It's Christmas. I said, you sure? He's doing really good. I got him in private school. All the story. Anyway, long story is, she sends for him. Pablo has him killed at the airport. 13-year-old kid. The guy that brought him to me ends up becoming one of Pablo's hitmen. We're bringing in the first loads that ever left Colombia to Mexico. We brought him in. We brought him. So one of those loads, it was going to go to Juarez, Mexico. And there was a big federal operation going on. So the plane got deviated outside of Houston in the Mexican side, right? And everything was fine. Everybody got their load and all that. 2 weeks later, this guy that brought me the kid, who I took care of for a year and a half, Victor, says, I need to talk to you. Now, I knew something was up because he would have come to my office. But yet, I'm like, where do you want to talk? He says, I'll meet you at Dadeland Mall. I'm like, all right. So everybody, hey, don't go. This sounds weird. So I'm like, look, I'm going to go and I'm going to go without nobody. Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to start a fight with anybody. It's crazy. So I meet him and I'm like, what's up? He said, Pablo put a hit on you and gave it to me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, well, this happened. You know that airstrip you guys landed in Houston, outside of Houston? It was Pablo's. When he found out, the guy running the strip told him that you said that it was okay. So I'm like, hold on. So we called Colombia and got a hold of Pablo. And I said, first and foremost, I did not know that it was your airstrip. Had I known, I would have asked you, and you would have had to give it to me the way I give you mine. And second of all, and most important of all, I don't lie. And you know that. And then he just hung up the phone and done.
And at that point, the hit was off.
It was off. And my godfather mentions in the documentary, he's like, you had a lot of guts, man, because he kills people in a whim. But, I don't know, somehow in the back of his mind, when I said, I don't lie, must have clicked that transaction that we had, which I could have made $2 million for doing, lying with him.
Right.
But I didn't,
As the federal government took more of an interest in cocaine smuggling, what sorts of everyday practices did you adopt with regard to communication, counter surveillance, et cetera?
We had such a sophisticated operation. Like, I'll give you one of the things that was really, I look at it now, it's funny. The first fax machines that came out, they were Canon, right? They were $10,000. We would transmit through the fax machine, like, okay, 100 kilos to such and such, or we sold that, whatever, all our transactions. If the line was bugged, the transaction would not go through. It would be gargled up. So we would know. Even though that every day we have people checking our telephone line, we're paying. I tell my kids, listen, quit the bickering about politicians, because I promise you one thing. David, we're spending $1 million a month in the late 70s paying off politicians.
There was the belief, in other words, That anybody could be bought if necessary.
Anybody could be bought, and everybody was bought. I'll tell you what, we were never able to buy an FBI agent or a DEA agent. We were able to buy customs. We bought customs left and right. We bought loads, literally 600 kilos, right through Miami International Airport every Thursday of the month for 3 years. So, and politicians left and right. So at the end of the day, they care about one thing, themselves. So, like I told them, you're going to make it, it's going to be up to you to make it, not up to anybody else to make it, you know. So because we had that amount of influence, we just knew everything that was going on. Because at the end of the day, like with law enforcement, we're paying people to simply say, look, there's an operation, or they're looking at you here, or they're looking at you there. I mean, it doesn't compromise them because we didn't want to. In my documentary now, I do have one police officer from Miami Police Department who recently came out, and then it ended up saying how he ended up working for me and all that. But we knew everything that was going on before it was ever happened. We knew what Janet Reno was doing before she even stepped out of her office, before she even left home. So, you know, it's the amount of money that, okay, two things. The amount of money that we're doing, and at the same time, the fact that cocaine was something that was not a stigma made it very easy to buy people. You know, and it was, and we did it all day long.
How does it feel now that you're out of this to know that you were involved in a business that led to people dying that didn't have to die? Innocent people in the cases of the family members, et cetera. How does it feel?
You know, it's funny. It's not funny, it's sad, because and that's the reason why I've always restrained. Look, when I was being offered $1 million for the rights to my story, they had no money to eat. I came out of prison dead broke, and I did not give in. And it's been now 28 years before I decided to really tell the story, exactly because of that. You know, we can justify, well, you know, I wasn't part of that violence, but I was part of the beginning. I was part of something that led to the violence. And that's what happens in life. We substantiate. You know, it's like, hey, look, you're just as guilty for stabbing someone as someone that holds that person, you know, that type of a thing. So yeah, and I live with that. And what I do, which now we've sent over 180,000 books to 800 prisons across the U.S., you know, a book to give people hope. And the letters that we get are immense. And people say, well, is that what you do? And I said, look, there's nothing I can do, nothing to make up for what I did. Nothing. You know, I tell my kids this, listen, anyone that breaks the law, selfish. It's selfish. Because the thing about it is, the only victims, the only non-victims are you, the lawbreaker, the criminal, because you chose to do that. But you got children, you got wives, you got parents. I destroyed my parents. I spent 10 years in jail. The first 10 years of my children's life, I was in prison. So you do all that. How do you ever get that back? You just can't. So what I do, I can make up for the wrong that I did. Yeah, you repent and you live with it for the rest of your life. And then at least you try to do something, not to make up for the wrong, but something to try to make some good out of that bad. You know, and
how'd you ultimately get caught?
Well, first of all, in 1979, I made a deal with the president of Bolivia. And at that time, I had never gotten in an airplane. But so when I went to Bolivia, as the airplane went to Bolivia to load up, I had to go and meet with Somoza in Nicaragua. And there was, at that time, there was not that many flights from South and Latin America to the US as they are now, as you know. So anyway, I ended up getting on the airplane and we landed in Colombia. We fueled up, everything was fine. Then on our way to Nicaragua, we crash landed in Panama. Both alternators went out. We couldn't get the fuel out. Long story, I got caught. The two pilots broke. And I was tortured for 29 days where I bled for the next 5 years every time I took a pee. And, you know, and the reason that, and this is what I tell my children, this is why truth to me matters so much. You know, if there's no truth in the world, then what really matters, right? And we look at the world where people just accept people that lie and they don't give a damn. I said, look, I did not lay in that jail in that Panamanian prison because I wanted people to look good at me. I didn't want it because I didn't want ever anyone to have to make my children lower their head because their father was not a man. I knew what I was doing. I made the choices that I made. Nobody made me do what I did. I went to prison for 10 years. I got tortured. I did all that on my own volition. Is the consequences. You know, I didn't live in a Lululand. You make choices, you got consequences. And that's what happened in my life. I got out of prison the first time and I went back to the same thing that I did before, only out of anger, you know, because I felt like I was kidnapped in Panama, brought to Macon, Georgia, which I'd never been in my entire life, charged, given 15-year sentence. At that time, I had the highest bond in the history of America. I was 23 years old. And then I came out and I want to get even. But then the world changed. That's when Pablo started and all the violence, and it wasn't me. And through a series of encounters, one with my daughter, was I got to walk. And knowing that walk, I might even end up getting killed. But I ended up going back to prison. I walked. I was retired for 4 years. And then Jeff Sessions come and got me. And they're like, we're not going to let you get away with all the drug money. And I'm like, well, do you all know how much money I got? And he's like, I don't, but I know who does. He got out of his office, opened the door, and 4 agents came out: DEA, FBI, IRS, and Customs. They knew how much toilet paper I consumed, and they're like, $65 million. We want it all. So at the age of 36, I went back to prison for another 5 years, 10-year sentence, because really all they could get me was on a violation of my parole. Right? I had been smuggling drugs. Because all they wanted was the money. It was a time when all the federal, the district attorney's office were getting rated by how much money that they, confiscated. So anyway, 65 million in Mobile, Alabama was more than they would ever dream of getting. So I went back to prison and I just decided I got to change my life. I got to become better. I taught myself Greek, came out, earned a master's degree, then a PhD. I was one of 5 Hispanics in the country with a PhD in theology, Bible, and ethics from Loyola University in Chicago. And when I figured out that I could not feed 6 children on a professor's salary, I started a company with my wife on the basement of our house doing disaster restoration. And in 10 years, I built it into a multi-million-dollar company.
Last thing I want to ask you, what went through your head when you found out that Pablo Escobar had been killed?
I knew he was going to get killed. He and I had talked many, many times, and he always told me this: they're never going to drag me to the U.S. walking. If they wanted to get me, take me to the U.S., it's going to be laying down. So Pablo ended up not getting killed, honestly. I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, and I think the only one that has said the same thing is his son, and I agree, Pablo killed himself. And he killed himself for the simple reason. He knew that they were about to kill. Look, when Pablo killed those 2 brothers in the prison, and they put a hit, and the rest of the cartel formed what was called Pepe's, People Against Pablo Escobar. He knew that they killed all his attorneys, they killed his accountants, they bombed all his houses. He tried to get his family to leave the U.S., to leave Colombia and come to the U.S. They won't take him. Germany won't take him. And they were hiding in a hotel. Pablo would get into a taxi cab with 20 cell phones and talk for 2.5 minutes. They could never track him. This day, David, he's standing by a window with the curtain open, talking on the cell phone with his son and his wife for 20 some odd minutes. The kids are telling the wife, hang up, daddy, hang up. And he did. He's got 1 bodyguard. So, and if you look where the bullet entered through that earlobe, this earlobe, So I would say, I would bet on it that he ended up committing suicide.
I see. So in other words, you're not saying he took his own life at his own hands, but he stayed on a phone call which allowed him to be tracked for long enough that authorities ultimately killed him.
Yeah. Think about it. When the guy that saw him, and they got voice recognition tracking him, right? All this technology from the U.S., the guy's looking at him in the window and is like calling the office and like, it sounds like Pablo, but it can't be. The guy's like, impossible. He's not that stupid, but, I think I knew that it would come to an end shortly, and that's how he would end it.
We have been speaking with Dr. Jorge Valdez, founding member of the group that went on to become the Medellin drug cartel. Really appreciate your time and your insights today.
David, I really enjoy your show. Keep it up.